The first thing I noticed was the smell. Cedar. Sharp, clean, and woody, like the inside of a hope chest. For 6 years, that smell had been a faint promise underneath the scent of my perfume and Marcus's cologne, the ghost of the wood buried under layers of our life together. But that evening, standing in the doorway of our bedroom, the scent was overwhelming. It was the smell of air moving through an empty space. The closet door was open. Hangers, skeletal and bare, swayed gently in the draft from the air conditioner, chiming against each other with a delicate, hollow sound. The wood was breathing for the first time in years. My name is Yvette. I am 32 years old, and for the last 6 of those years, I was married to Marcus. I'm a civil engineer. I design bridges, retaining walls, foundations, the things that hold the world up. My job is to understand stress, to calculate load-bearing capacity, to know the precise point at which a material will fail. I deal in tolerances, in tensile strength, in the invisible forces that can bring a mountain down or keep a skyscraper standing. A relationship, I've learned, is also a structure. It has a foundation laid in the early days. It has load-bearing walls of trust and respect, and it has a designated tolerance for stress. For years, I believed our structure was sound. I thought we were building something together. It took me 6 years to realize I wasn't the co-architect. I was just the foundation, buried underground, holding everything up and never seeing the sun. The moment the structure was condemned came on a Tuesday. It was a day like any other, which is how the most catastrophic failures often begin. No earthquake, no hurricane, just the slow, relentless pressure of everyday life exposing a fatal design flaw. We were in the living room, the television murmuring in the background. I had been trying, for weeks, to show him the blueprints of my own unhappiness, to point out the hairline fractures that were spiderwebbing across my spirit. I'd been using the wrong language, I suppose. I spoke of feelings, of loneliness, of being unseen. He heard it as weather, a passing storm that required him to simply close the windows and wait it out. That night, I decided to be direct. I muted the television and turned to him. His face was illuminated by the blue light of his phone. "Marcus," I said, my voice quieter than I intended. "We need to talk." He grunted, his thumb still scrolling. "I can't do this anymore," I said, the words feeling foreign and sharp in my mouth. "The way things are, I feel like I'm disappearing. I think I need to leave." That got his attention. He looked up from his phone, a slow blink, as if adjusting to a change in light. He didn't look alarmed. He didn't look hurt. He looked amused. A small, patronizing smile touched the corners of his mouth. He set his phone down, the picture of a patient husband dealing with a flighty wife. Then he said the words that brought the whole thing down. "Babe, you're not going anywhere. We both know that." He chuckled then, a soft, airy sound that didn't reach his eyes. It was a sound of absolute certainty. He held out his hand. "Come here." It wasn't a request. It was a summons. The same tone one uses for a dog that has strayed too far in the park. And the laugh? The laugh was the wrecking ball. It wasn't just dismissive. It was an erasure. He wasn't just ignoring my pain. He was telling me my pain wasn't real. It was a performance, a dramatic little scene I was playing out for attention. He had assessed my statement, my carefully worded declaration of profound structural failure, and judged it to be nothing more than a temporary mood. He had looked at a wall about to collapse and decided it just needed a new coat of paint. I didn't move. I just sat there, the sound of his laughter echoing in the sudden vast silence of the room. In that echo, I heard the history of every time my professional judgment had been ignored, every time my exhaustion had been minimized, every time my contribution had been taken for granted. He thought he knew my breaking point. As an engineer, I knew he had miscalculated. He had forgotten that foundations don't just complain. Eventually, they crack. The erosion didn't start as a hostile act. It began as partnership, or what I mistook for it. When Marcus decided to leave the large firm where we'd met and start his own small architectural consultancy, I was his biggest champion. He was the visionary, the artist. I was the pragmatist, the one who knew how to make the beautiful things he dreamed up actually stand. In the beginning, it felt like a perfect synergy. We were a team, burning the midnight oil in our small home office, his sketches and my calculations spread across the dining room table. The first time it happened, it was a Wednesday night, nearly 1 a.m. The air in our small house was thick with the smell of stale coffee and the low hum of my workstation. I had a major deadline of my own on Monday, a stress analysis for a new municipal overpass. But Marcus was in a panic. A high-value client had come back with a list of revisions on a set of blueprints, and they were due Friday. He was drowning. He came to my side of the table, running a hand through his hair. He looked exhausted and handsome and utterly lost. "Yvette," he'd said, his voice laced with that specific brand of fatigue that always pulled at my heart. "I'm so buried. Can you just draft this for me real quick? You're faster anyway." He was right. I was faster. My hands knew the software commands like a second language. I was trained in precision, in the clean, unambiguous lines of structural reality. His work was more fluid, more conceptual, so I pushed my own project aside. "Of course," I said. I told myself this was what a supportive wife did. This was our shared investment. I finished his revisions by 3 a.m. He kissed the top of my head, murmured a thank you, and went to bed. I stayed up for another hour, trying to get my own work back on track, my brain sluggish from the shift in focus. On Friday, he had his big meeting. He called me that afternoon, elated. "They loved it, babe. They signed off on everything. We're moving to the next phase." He thanked me again, profusely, even mentioning my name in the meeting, my brilliant engineer wife who saved the day. I felt a warm glow of pride. We did it. By dinner that night, the glow had faded. He was talking about the project as when I presented the final draft, the solution I came up with. My 3 a.m. contribution had been absorbed, assimilated into his own narrative of success. It wasn't a malicious erasure. It was just an oversight, a detail that got lost in the glow of his own victory. I spent the entire weekend catching up on my overpass analysis, fueled by caffeine and the diminishing returns of feeling like a good partner. That was the first hairline fracture. A tiny crack, almost invisible to the naked eye, but there. The cracks started to multiply. They were small at first. Using my industry contacts to get him a meeting, asking me to just take a quick look at a materials estimate that turned into a 4-hour overhaul. He was building his business, and I was proud of him. I slowly began to realize, his unpaid in-house engineering consultant. The work was never logged, never invoiced, never formally acknowledged beyond a casual "thanks, babe." It was just part of the domestic infrastructure, like laundry or groceries, the invisible labor that made his visible success possible. Then Bryce's voice began to seep into our home. Bryce was Marcus's best friend from college, a loud, confident finance bro who saw the world in terms of assets and liabilities. He was charismatic in a way that made you forgive his arrogance, at least for the first 10 minutes. He and Marcus spoke on the phone constantly, their conversations a mix of sports, stock tips, and Bryce's unsolicited advice on everything from cars to women. I didn't think much of it until the night Marcus came home from having drinks with him. He was tossing his keys into the ceramic bowl by the door, a pleased, self-satisfied smile on his face. "What are you so happy about?" I asked, stirring a pot of red beans on the stove, the comforting smell of garlic and bay leaf filling our small kitchen. "Just talking to Bryce," he said, coming up behind me and wrapping his arms around my waist. He rested his chin on my shoulder, looking at the simmering pot. "He gets it. He gets us." "What's to get?" I laughed. "He says you're a lifer," Marcus said, his voice proud, as if relaying a compliment. He said, "That one's a lifer, man. She's solid. He can read people." I went still, the wooden spoon hovering over the beans. A lifer. The word landed with a thud in my chest. It wasn't a compliment. It was a classification. A lifer is someone serving a sentence. A lifer is a sure thing, a fixed asset. It implies permanence without passion, presence without choice. It was the language of an investor, not a husband. A lifer doesn't need to be courted or cherished or even considered, because a lifer isn't going anywhere. "What a weird thing to say," I said, trying to keep my voice light. "No, it's a good thing," he insisted, completely missing the chill that had settled over me. "It means he sees how committed you are, how you're my rock." I was his rock. I was his foundation. I was solid. I was a lifer. He was reciting these words like vows, but they felt like the bars of a cage. And for the first time, I realized that Marcus wasn't just listening to Bryce's advice. He was importing Bryce's entire worldview. He was starting to see our marriage not as a living, breathing entity, but as a portfolio he was managing. And I was his most reliable, low-risk asset. The moment I truly understood the depth of Bryce's influence was a Friday night, a few months before the end. Marcus and Bryce were heading out of town for a fishing trip. I was standing on our front porch, sipping a glass of iced tea, watching them load coolers and fishing gear into the back of Marcus's truck. The New Orleans air was heavy and humid, thick with the scent of jasmine from my neighbor's vine. Bryce slammed the tailgate shut and clapped Marcus on the shoulder. His voice carried easily across the driveway, loud and sure of itself. "Dude, you're worried for nothing. She'll be fine. She's a lifer, bro. They talk, they don't walk." Marcus grinned. He didn't correct him. He didn't defend me. He just grinned, a confident, knowing look passing between them. It was a moment of pure, uncut male camaraderie, built on a shared, condescending assumption about me, about my predictability, about my lack of agency. I was the responsible one, the one who stayed home and kept the lights on while they went off to play. My concerns, my recent attempts to talk about our growing distance, were just that. Talk. The harmless noise a lifer makes. I stepped back from the door, out of sight, my face burning. He hadn't just heard Bryce's assessment. He'd endorsed it. He'd co-signed the idea that my voice was just weather. This philosophy, my supposed status as a lifer, began to justify a deeper level of professional encroachment. The biggest test came when it was time for Marcus to get his professional engineer license. It was a huge step for his business, the credential that would allow him to sign off on his own plans and take on bigger, more lucrative projects. It was also expensive. The exam fees, the application processing, the official state registration, it all added up to $1,840. Money his fledgling business didn't have. We were sitting at the kitchen table, a pile of his mail between us. He slid the invoice from the state licensing board across to me with a sigh. I don't know how I'm going to swing this right now, Vetta. Cash flow is tight. I had just received my annual bonus. It was sitting in my personal savings account, earmarked for a new car or maybe, I'd hoped, a real vacation for the two of us. I looked at his face, at the genuine stress in his eyes. He was building our future, I told myself. This was an investment in us. I'll cover it, I said. His face flooded with relief. Are you sure? Babe, that's amazing. It's a shared investment, I said, forcing a smile. I transferred the money that night. In my personal ledger, a meticulous spreadsheet I kept for our finances, I created a new line item. I labeled it MPE License, Shared Investment. A few weeks later, the official certificate arrived in a handsome cardboard mailer. Marcus was ecstatic. He went out the next day and bought a beautiful custom mahogany frame for it. He hung it in his home office, right over his desk. His name was printed on it in elegant embossed lettering, Marcus Antoine Devereaux, professional engineer. My name appeared nowhere, not on the certificate, not on the frame. My bonus, the $1,840 that made it possible, was invisible. The line item in my spreadsheet was the only record of my contribution. He thanked me, of course. He hugged me and told me he couldn't have done it without me, but his gratitude had the same casual, fleeting quality as his thanks for the late-night drafting session. It was appreciation for a service rendered. It didn't feel like the acknowledgement of a partner's sacrifice. He saw the certificate as his achievement. I saw it as a joint venture where only one partner's name was on the letterhead. I'd look at that framed license sometimes when I walked past his office. It was a monument to his success, but for me, it became a symbol of my own erasure. I was the silent partner, the financier, the structural support holding up the beautiful facade. And the most painful part was that he didn't even see it. He truly believed he had built it all himself. He'd look at his name on the wall and see a self-made man. He never saw the woman who had drafted his plans, paid his fees, and slowly, line by line, been deleted from the blueprint of their life. The day it all ended, the day I finally said the word goodbye, was the culmination of all these moments. The conversation started quietly, but it was underpinned by years of accumulated stress. I was trying to explain the load I was carrying, the weight of my career, his career, our home, our future. I feel like I'm holding up a bridge by myself, Marcus, I told him, my voice trembling slightly. And I'm tired. The fatigue is in my bones. He was looking at his phone, half listening, the way he always did when I talked about my feelings. He heard the words, but he didn't register their weight. To him, my fatigue was a temporary condition, like a cold. It would pass. I need a partner, I said, my voice getting stronger. Not just a roommate. I need someone who sees the load and helps me carry it. I do, he said, his eyes still on the screen. I'm here, aren't I? No, I said, and the word was a stone in my throat. You're present, but you're not here. There's a difference. I took a deep breath. I can't do this anymore. I think I need to leave. That's when he looked up. That's when he smiled, that small, knowing smile. That's when he said it. Babe, you're not going anywhere. We both know that. And then he laughed. It was a soft, breathy sound. But in that sound, I heard everything. I heard Bryce in the driveway saying, "They talk, they don't walk." I heard the casual confidence of a man who believed he had a lifer. I heard the echo of every forgotten thank you, every invisible hour of work, every dismissed concern. It was the laugh of a man who had audited his assets and found me to be a fixed, depreciating part of the portfolio. Someone who no longer required active investment. And in that instant, something inside me went perfectly, terrifyingly still. It was the feeling I get on a job site right before a controlled demolition. The charges are set, the perimeter is cleared, and there is a moment of absolute ringing silence before the explosion. In that silence, I saw our entire 6-year marriage for what it was, a structure with a fatal design flaw. It had been built on the flawed assumption of my infinite tensile strength. My anger didn't rise, my heart didn't break. Instead, a cold, crystalline clarity settled over me. It was the calm, detached focus of an engineer assessing a catastrophic failure. The problem was no longer something to be repaired. The entire structure was compromised. There was no argument to be made, no plea to be heard. There was only a professional assessment. I looked at him, still smiling, waiting for me to walk over and fold myself into his arms to concede to his version of reality. I didn't say a word. I just stood up and walked out of the room. The calculation was complete. The structure was condemned. All that was left was the demolition. And demolition, I knew, had to be planned with methodical precision. Bryce's bachelor weekend had been on our shared calendar for months. It was to be a 3-day affair of fishing, drinking, and whatever other nonsense they had planned at a rented cabin a few hours away. In the past, I would have dreaded it, knowing Marcus would come home exhausted and useless for 2 days. Now, I saw it for what it was, a window of opportunity, a pre-cleared perimeter. In the days leading up to his departure, I became the perfect wife, the lifer. I performed my role with a new, detached efficiency. I made his favorite meals. I asked about his day and listened with feigned interest. I packed his bag for the trip, making sure he had enough socks and his favorite fishing lures. My placid surface was a deliberate act of camouflage. Beneath it, a quiet, methodical operation was underway. He mistook my calm for surrender. He thought his little laugh, his confident dismissal, had worked. He thought he had successfully managed my little emotional outburst and returned the system to its normal state. One evening, he came into the kitchen while I was washing dishes, the water running over my hands. He wrapped his arms around me from behind, just as he used to. "See," he murmured into my hair. "We're good. You were just tired." I leaned back against him, a hollow space inside me where a heart used to be. "I was just tired," I repeated, my voice flat. He kissed my neck. "You're being dramatic again. Come on," he said, but it was playful this time, a gentle ribbing. "Everything's fine." I just nodded, my eyes focused on the suds swirling down the drain. He had no idea I had spent my lunch break that day signing a lease on a small apartment in the warehouse district. He didn't know that while he was watching TV, I was on my laptop, systematically rerouting my direct deposit, changing passwords, and arranging for a moving truck. I was dismantling our life together with the quiet, focused precision of an engineer decommissioning a failed structure. Every action was a calculated step in a carefully sequenced plan. There was no drama. There was only logistics. The Friday he left was bright and clear. He was buzzing with excitement, slinging his duffel bag over his shoulder. Bryce was outside, honking the horn of his oversized truck. "All right, babe, I'm out of here," he said, giving me a quick, distracted kiss. "Don't miss me too much." "I won't," I said. The words were perfectly honest. He laughed, taking it as a joke. "Love you." "Bye, Marcus," I said. He was already out the door, jogging toward the truck, his mind on the weekend ahead. He never noticed that I didn't say, "I love you" back. He never noticed the finality in my voice. He was a man leaving for a weekend trip. He had no idea he was leaving his life behind. The moment his truck turned the corner, the silence that descended on the house was profound. It was the same silence I'd felt in the living room a few nights before, but this time it wasn't ringing with unspoken tension. It was filled with possibility. It was the silence of a blank page. I didn't waste any time. The moving truck was scheduled to arrive in an hour. My best friend, Simone, was on her way over with boxes and coffee. My temperature, my internal emotional state was structural. It was the cool, calm focus of a project manager on demolition day. This was not an act of passion. It was an act of physics, a necessary correction. We started with the closet. I pulled out 6 empty garment bags and 2 large moving boxes. Simone stood in the doorway, a sad, knowing look on her face. She had been waiting for this day for years. "You sure about this?" she asked softly. "I've never been more sure of anything," I said, and the truth of it settled into my bones. I unzipped the first bag and began. My work suits, the ones I wore to my own job, came first. Then the dresses, the one I wore on our first date, the one from his first awards dinner, the one from my sister's wedding. Each garment was a memory, and I folded them all away with a strange lack of emotion. I wasn't packing memories, I was clearing a site. We worked in a steady, efficient rhythm. The closet emptied with surprising speed. When it was done, my side was a cavern of bare cedar. His side remained untouched, a dense forest of suits and shirts. The asymmetry was the message. This was not a separation of shared assets. This was an extraction. I was removing myself, and only myself, from the equation. The rest of the house was a similar process. My books from the shelves, my pots and pans from the kitchen, my drafting tools from the shared office. Simone and I were a quiet, efficient team. The movers came and went in under 2 hours. By late afternoon, the house was still full of furniture, but it was hollowed out. It was a stage set from which the lead actress had departed. The last thing I did was walk into his office. The mahogany-framed PE license hung on the wall, gleaming under the track lighting. I looked at it for a long moment, at the proud, embossed letters of his name. I felt nothing. No anger, no resentment. Just a quiet sense of finality. I opened my briefcase, which I'd set on his desk. From it, I took 2 things. First, a printed copy of the invoice for the $1,840 in licensing fees, the one I had paid from my bonus. Second, I took out my professional engineering stamp. It was heavy in my hand, made of steel and rubber, bearing my name and my license number. It was the symbol of my career, my expertise, my authority. The authority I had so freely loaned to him. I laid the invoice flat on his desk, directly on top of his keyboard where he couldn't miss it. I opened the ink pad. I pressed the stamp firmly into the ink, then centered it over the bottom right corner of the page. I pressed down hard, feeling the satisfying thud as the seal imprinted itself on the paper. I lifted it away. There, in crisp official purple ink, was my name. Yvette Dubois, P.E. It wasn't a love note. It wasn't an angry letter. It was a professional document. A final, signed-off record of my contribution. An invoice for services rendered. I left my house keys on top of it. I took one last look around the quiet, empty-feeling house. Then I closed the door behind me and didn't look back. He got home late Sunday night, as expected. My phone, which had been silent for 2 days, lit up just before midnight. The first call went to voicemail, then a second, then a third. Then the texts began. "Where are you?" "Yvette, What the hell is going on? Pick up the phone. Your side of the closet is empty. This isn't funny. I watched the messages appear on my screen from the comfort of my new apartment. I was sitting on a pile of cushions on the floor, drinking tea, the city lights of New Orleans twinkling through my floor-to-ceiling windows. I felt a strange sense of detachment, like I was watching a movie about someone else's life. I did not respond. The next morning, the tone shifted. He must have found the invoice on his desk. You think this is a joke? Stamping my invoice? What is that supposed to mean? After everything I've done for us, this is how you act. You're being dramatic again. Come on. Just tell me where you are so we can talk this out. The accusation of being dramatic felt particularly ironic. My exit had been the least dramatic event of our entire marriage. It was a masterpiece of logistical planning and quiet execution. His frantic, escalating messages were the drama. He was texting Bryce, I was sure of it, and Bryce, true to form, would be telling him to hold the line, that this was just a bluff, a power play, that the lifer was just testing her chain. He tried recruiting allies next. He called my sister, who told him calmly that she had nothing to say to him, and hung up. He called Simone, who laughed and said, took her long enough, before also hanging up. His support system was his. Mine was mine. The lines had been drawn long ago. He just hadn't seen them. After 2 days of angry, unanswered texts, the silence came. It lasted for 72 hours. I knew what this stage was. This was the point where the advice from Bryce was no longer working. This was the point where the reality of the empty closet, the silent phone, the returned calls from my family was beginning to penetrate his armor of self-assurance. The call came on a Thursday evening. I was unpacking my books, the familiar spines a comforting presence in my new space. I saw his name on the screen and, for reasons I still don't fully understand, I decided to answer. I put the phone on speaker and continued shelving my books. Yvette? His voice was different. The anger was gone. The bluster was gone. All that was left was a raw, genuine confusion. I'm here, Marcus, I said, my voice even. I don't get it, he said, and he sounded like a lost child. I came home. Your things are gone. You left this thing on my desk. It's an invoice, I said calmly. Why? He asked, his voice cracking. I don't understand. We had a fight. People have fights. I thought goodbye was something you said when you were upset. And there it was. The fundamental flaw in his understanding of the world laid bare. He believed my departure was an emotional outburst, a temporary state of being upset. He could not conceive that it was the result of a long, careful, and deeply painful calculation. He saw the storm, but he had never once inspected the foundations. I paused, a heavy textbook on soil mechanics in my hand. I set it on the shelf. No, Marcus, I said, my voice quiet but clear. That's not what goodbye is. He waited, desperate for an explanation he could understand. Upset is weather, I said. Goodbye is climate change. I heard him take a breath, but I didn't wait for his response. I ended the call. I knew, with an engineer's certainty, that some structures are not meant to be retrofitted. They just have to be left behind. The months that followed were a quiet revelation. Living alone was not a state of lack, but a state of surplus. I had a surplus of time, a surplus of energy, a surplus of mental space. The energy I had poured into managing his career, his moods, his ego, was now mine to invest in myself. And I invested it wisely. My firm had been trying to get a municipal grant for a pedestrian footbridge over the bayou near City Park. It was a small, elegant project, but one that required a delicate touch, a blend of aesthetic grace and serious structural integrity. It had been a back-burner project for years. I took it on. I spent my evenings not drafting revisions for someone else's client, but sketching designs for my own. The curve of the arches, the placement of the tension cables, the material specifications for the decking, it was all mine. The project consumed me in the best possible way. It was a structure designed to connect 2 points, to make a journey easier, to carry people safely over water. The metaphor was not lost on me. 6 months after I left, my design was approved. The grant came through. It was my project, from concept to completion. The first time I saw the full set of official blueprints, ready for submission, my breath caught in my throat. I ran my hand over the crisp, heavy paper. In the bottom right corner of every single page, in the title block, were the words, "Designed by Yvette Dubois, P.E., my name, my work, my signature. The vindication I felt wasn't a sharp, triumphant thing. It was a deep, quiet, structural integrity. It was the feeling of standing on solid ground after years of walking on a surface I knew to be unstable. I wasn't thriving to spite him. I was thriving because the single greatest impediment to my growth had been removed. I hadn't left a marriage. I had removed a load that was threatening to crush me. I saw Marcus about a year after I left. I was at a coffee shop near my apartment reviewing a materials report. The bell over the door jingled, and in he walked. He looked ordinary, smaller than I remembered. The larger-than-life confidence that had been his defining feature had been replaced by a quiet uncertainty. He looked like a man who now had to pack his own lunch, who had to remember to pay the internet bill, who had to solve his own problems. He saw me and hesitated, then walked over. "Yvette," he said. "Hi. Marcus?" I nodded, closing my laptop. "You look good," he said. It was an observation, not a pickup line. "I'm doing well," I said. An awkward silence fell between us. "I heard about the City Park Bridge," he said finally. "Congratulations, that's a big deal." "Thank you," I said. "It's a good project." "Yeah," he said, looking down at his hands. "Things at the firm have been tough. Lost a couple of clients. It's hard to keep up with the drafting." I felt a ghost of the old instinct rise up in me, the urge to offer help, to say, "I can take a look," to solve his problem. It was a deeply ingrained reflex. But then it passed, like a phantom limb itching. It was not my problem to solve. His business, his drafting, his career, it was his. For the first time, fully and completely, it was his. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and I meant it. I felt no joy in his struggle, only a profound, unshakable peace in the knowledge that it was no longer my load to bear. He nodded, gave me a sad, small smile, and walked away to order his coffee. I watched him go, a stranger I had once built a life around. There was no anger, no bitterness, just distance. The kind of distance you feel when you look at a photograph of a place you used to live, a place you no longer call home. There is a principle in civil engineering called structural redundancy. It's the idea that you build more supports into a system than are strictly necessary, so that if one part fails, the load is redistributed and the entire structure doesn't collapse. For years, I thought my role in our marriage was to be that redundancy, the extra support, the fail-safe. I was the one who would always hold, always carry, always absorb the excess stress. What I came to understand is that a partnership isn't meant to have a designated fail-safe. It is meant to be a fully redundant system in itself. The load is meant to be shared, always. not divided, not allocated, but carried together so that the weight is halved for both. When one person becomes the entire support system, it's no longer a partnership. It's a foundation holding up a monument to someone else. Leaving Marcus wasn't about hating him. It was about respecting the laws of physics. No material, no matter how strong, can bear a load beyond its design capacity indefinitely. It will bend, it will crack, and eventually, it will break. My departure wasn't a failure of love. It was a failure of engineering. He had designed a life that I could no longer structurally support. The laugh was not the cause of the collapse. It was merely the sound the structure made as it finally gave way. Now, my life is my own design. It's a smaller structure, perhaps, but the foundation is sound, the materials are honest, and every single blueprint bears my name. I have learned to find peace in the quiet integrity of a thing well built. I am the engineer, the architect, and the occupant, and the ground beneath my feet has never felt more solid. If you enjoyed this story, please like, comment, and share this video with your friends. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a powerful story drop.